Welcome to Read by the Author, Season 3, Episode 17. Tonight, we are continuing Time Anomaly with Part 7, and I did skim through the remaining chapters, and I think we probably have 3 episodes left, so tonight, and then 2 more. So, just so you know what to look forward to with the layout of this season. And then, well, I'll wait until we get to the end of the season to tell you what's coming for. We've got a betweeny season before we get to season 4, so which I'm really excited about the betweeny season. I think it's going to be really, really fun. So just so you know, that's happening. Okay, so let's get into the story. Part 7, Netjerat Oasis, Egypt, present day. 43. Cat. And minutes later, when I woke, you were cradling me in your arms. And can I just say that nothing can give a hangover like a chute explosion? I laughed out loud. Lex had been through so much, but it was like writing to Marcus was her outlet. The one way she had learned to deal with all of the crazy without actually going crazy. My laugh faded quickly as I glanced down at the words filling the page. Marcus was going to be pissed when he found out about what Nguyen told Lex, that she might have to sacrifice herself to give the rest of us a chance, and that even if everything worked out, their kids would end up being god slaves to Universal Order for, ever. Lex had been gone for almost a month, and Marcus was slowly unraveling, not because of bonding withdrawals or anything like that, but because there seemed to be no end, no winding down of her adventures in the past. I thought he'd actually started to think that his past self had managed to find a way for Lex to live out the thousands of years separating us from her, and that this Marcus would have to wait 4,000 more years to ever see her again. It didn't even matter that it was impossible. And I was pretty sure Marcus didn't give a flying crapola about any of this Ep17 or Ma'at stuff. All that mattered to him was Lex. Lex returning, Lex ridding herself of the chute poisoning her, Lex having twins. Staring at the words she had inscribed so long ago, I let out a heavy sigh and stuck out my lower lip. Marcus might actually start caring about that bigger picture stuff now that both their fates and their unborn kids apparently seemed to be zooming toward a brick wall otherwise known as complete and utter destruction if they failed. If they failed, we were all dead. My chest clenched and I felt something wet on my cheek and hastily wiped it away. I was not crying. I wasn't. With a sigh, I turned the page and continued recording. At least the dome really did hold, and I really didn't kill everyone. My God, can you imagine? I'm having a hard enough time dealing with the fact that I killed 4 people, that I hardly cared that I was killing them while I was doing it. It's sick and twisted and totally creepy, and it's definitely something that's going to haunt my dreams for years. Assuming we have years. Anyway, after the chute explosion, Nakure wrapped Apep on Kesempepe's wrists in chains of At. He created an At dagger and held it flush against the front of her neck. Of course, when I opened my mouth to warn him that the threat of death was more like promising to fulfill Apep's deepest desires, Apep on Kesempepe slammed her head forward and slit her own damn throat. We're just lucky that Apep hasn't been able to do the same with Set. If Set didn't have a will of iron, but he does, so it's no use worrying about something that won't happen. Right, so Kesempepe bled out right in front of us, and Apep oozed out of her in all of his inky, oily glory and started toward me. Nguyen, or rather Ra, who had apparently been lying in wait in Nguyen's dead body, rose up in a sparkling iridescent mist and rushed Apep, who chose to hide in the nearest person, Netjerat or otherwise, rather than be subjected to whatever Ra could do to him in his now incorporeal state. As I'm sure you've guessed by now, the person Apep hid in was none other than Set, who immediately passed out. I frowned. I had spent my whole life hating and fearing my dad. He was the monster under the bed, in the closet, and standing just outside, watching through the window. Hell, there were a bunch of times he probably had been standing just outside the window, watching me and Mom. He had always been such a creeper. Which made it so damn weird to think that my real dad, the guy who gave me his genes, wasn't actually a bad guy. According to everything I had read of Lex's, and I'd read a lot, he was kind of a sweetheart. And Lex was going to trap him, hold him prisoner in his own body for pretty much ever, as far as we knew. And that was the best case scenario. I swallowed repeatedly and cleared my throat. I would not freaking cry. I had a job to do, and it didn't include blubbering like a baby, damn it. Taking a deep breath, I continued writing. Ra, having no body and no incorporeal enemy to contend with, changed direction. He hovered around Nakure, who was completely baffled as to why the shimmering mist was doing that until I told him that Ra... Well, I said Nuin to him because I hadn't actually explained all that stuff about Nuin actually being Ra, mythological arch-nemesis of Apep, blah, blah, blah. Was probably waiting for permission. Once Nakure understood, his face brightened with a smile, and he nodded. Personally, I wouldn't have been so eager to be possessed, but to each his own. Wait, what? I stared at the wall, at Lex's next words, my eyes wide and my mouth hanging open. No effing way. I blinked several times and read her words out loud. We watched as Ra seeped into Nakure, and then he passed out too. I licked my lips and shook my head at the wall. Holy effing shitballs. I can honestly say that I didn't think it would be you, Nick said from the lone doorway out of the chamber. I yelped and flung my notebook and pen in the air. They landed just beyond my feet as I spun on my butt to face the intruder. Nick stepped into the room and raised his hand to the doorway. A sheet of what looked like liquid tinfoil spread out from his palm, covering the opening in seconds. In a blink, it turned into pale, shimmering stone that matched the room's walls, ceiling, and floor. Not stone, I realized. Solidified ought. I shifted so my feet were under me and rose slowly, like not making any fast movements might prevent Nick from doing whatever the hell he was planning to do that required a door of ought sealing us in. I backed away just as slowly until my back hit a wall. My heart pounded in my chest. He was still standing by the blocked doorway, watching me. His head was cocked to the side, and a tiny smile curved his lips. What do you want? He shook his head and just kept on staring at me, wearing that knowing little smile. I won't tell anyone if that's what you're worried about. I mean, if you want me to keep it a secret that you're, possessed. I cleared my throat. I will. Nick's eyebrows rose, and he touched his fingertips to the front of his black t-shirt. Me? He shook his head, and the corner of his mouth turned down in the slightest possible frown. I don't want anything from you. He does. He? I blinked several times. Nuin? Ra? Why? I shook my head. I don't have anything. What could he possibly want from me? Nick grinned and closed his eyes for several seconds. When he opened them again, they were no longer pale blue, but the color of glimmering opals. His expression changed, becoming warm and kind and making Nick's face seem far less menacing and far more handsome. Katerina Dubois, he said, bowing his head. We have never actually met, though I have heard much about you, and I have seen you many times. Through Nakure's eyes, of course. He held his hands up in a placating gesture. I mean you no harm, I swear it. And Nick? He shrugged.
I do not know his inner thoughts, only those he chooses to share with me. I swallowed. How reassuring. We do not have much time.
What are you?
Alexandra will be returning in a matter of minutes. How do you? A long time ago, she informed Nikure and myself of several occurrences that would herald her return to this time. Someone discovering the truth about me was the final sign, though she seemed to find great amusement in not telling us who that someone would be. I am certain that finding out that it's you will both disturb and intrigue Nikure greatly. He waved his hand dismissively. But that is of no matter right now. Alexandra will arrive momentarily. So why are we... You have a very important task, he said, interrupting me again. It was getting annoying. One that the fate of the universe depends on. I felt the color drain from my face. I was pretty sure I didn't have whatever it took to be one of those universe depends on you kind of people. That was more of Lex and Marcus's shtick, not mine. Oh, what do I have to do? Nick smiled blissfully. You must find Heru. Alert him of Alexandra's arrival. Then hunt down Carson and... Carson? I frowned and tilted my head to the side. Why? I may have felt a teensy bit of pleasure in interrupting him that time. Nick's cheek twitched. Because he is important as well. Together, the two of you will trigger a series of events that must be. Now, you must... Does he know about you too? I couldn't hold in all of my grin at getting the chance to interrupt him again. Is that why Nick sort of hates him? Nick strode toward the door of Ott and touched his hand to its surface. It evaporated almost immediately. There is no time to explain. He stepped to the side of the doorway. Go now, Katerina. Eyes wide and heart beating too quickly. Lex is returning. I pushed off the wall and ran past Nick toward the doorway. I wasn't sure if it was my imagination, but I may or may not have heard him murmur something that sounded an awful lot like, I am sorry. 44. Lex. There, I said as I pulled my fingertips from Heru's forehead. It is done. I smirked just a little, and I promised to let you shatter the bonding block as soon as possible when I return to my time. I know how much you enjoy doing that. Heru didn't return my teasing smirk, and no mischief sparkled in his eyes. There, only sadness shone, pure and bright. He cupped either side of my jaw, tilting my face upward, and gazed into my eyes, searching, asking, pleading. Alexandra, little queen. His voice was soft, his touch tender. You do not need to do this. The bonding block, that was necessary, but my memories of you, I need them. The thought of not knowing. We were surrounded by an ocean of sand about a mile from the oasis, which was now covered in an Ott dome and a mound of limestone rubble. The rest of our people awaited us, just out of sight. Or rather, they awaited him. I would not be returning with him. I would not be traveling back across the Red Land to Men Nefer with Heru and the rest of his family. Would not watch his children grow up. Would not be a part of his life for thousands of years. I smiled the saddest smile. But you do not need your memories of me. Not yet. And you will not miss them, because you will not know of them. But I want to keep them, he said somberly. My smile turned bitter. There is a great deal of difference. There is a great difference between want and need, I said, echoing something he had told me thousands of years in the future, in Seattle, just before walking me home for the first time. Heru's eyes were filled with a plea, but he didn't ask again. Standing on tiptoes, I brushed my lips across his and whispered, I love you, my Heru, so very, very much. And before you know it, I will be standing in front of you, unsealing your memories of my time here.
right before I reached into his mind and locked every single memory of me, of all that had happened since my arrival, behind an impenetrable wall, replacing them with his own version of the same vague recollections I had given to everyone else. Everyone except Aset, Nikure, and the 3 Hathor priestesses, of course. Heru pulled away and eyed me quizzically.
Apologies.
He shook his head, a tiny confused smile tugging one corner of his mouth.
I do not know.
He cocked his head to the side.
Do I know you?
No, I said, taking a step back. The single word was thick with emotion, so I cleared my throat. But one day you will know me. My eyes stung with unshed tears as I pointed to a nearby sand dune. Your family, Sesha and your children, await you just beyond the crest. You should rejoin them.
My family.
Heru's eyes searched mine and his face fell.
Bunifer, Tarset, they are gone?
I had to fight the urge to reach out to him, to comfort him. He no longer knew me, and doing so would only upset and confuse him further. I am very sorry for your loss, Heru. I truly am. Swallowing roughly, I gestured toward the dune. Your family needs you now. You should go to them.
Yes.
Brow furrowed, he studied me for a moment longer, then turned and ascended the dune. At the top, he looked over his shoulder, meeting my eyes one last time, and then he was gone. I felt like my heart had been ripped out of my chest, just as Epep had threatened to do weeks ago. I closed my eyes, allowing a single tear to escape, then took a deep breath and shifted back to just outside the broken oasis, where Aset, Nikure, and the priestesses were waiting for me. I re-entered the physical plane in a poof of misty colors, directly in front of the mouth of a new tunnel, the only way through the rubble and into the covered city. Aset and Nikure were standing off to the side, speaking quietly to the priestesses. From the snippets I caught as I approached, I surmised that they were solidifying their story of what happened over the past month, making sure everything was in sync so there wouldn't be any inconsistencies to raise eyebrows. I reached into the folds of my desert robe as I approached them, pausing to scratch Russ's head before pulling a small, rolled-up sheet of papyrus from the tiny drawstring purse tied to my belt. I handed it to Aset and met her eyes. You must give this to me after you find me in Cairo. You will know when I need you by watching Set. I glanced at Nikure. You are certain you can break through Set's cloak in my time, even when the art has been made unstable by the nothingness? Smirking, Nikure nodded.
I have always been stronger than Set.
I frowned, worrying my bottom lip. And you are absolutely certain that he does not know of your shoot? That Epep won't be able to glean that from his mind? I had blocked both Set's and Epep's memories of me, just as I had done to everyone else, but I hadn't thought to search for anything relating to Nikure's unusual parentage. Again, Nikure nodded.
He believes me to be Heru's first son, the product of a pre-manifestation affair with a woman from the cold lands while Heru and my mother were traveling in the north.
I nodded once. Good. It must remain that way. I turned my attention back to Aset. I do not know how long it will take for Epep to take control of Set's body, so you must be wary of him. I believe Set will remain Set for quite some time, but when you see the darkness in his eyes, you will know that Epep is in control. And you must always remember that even when Epep is not in control, he can see and hear everything Set sees and hears. We understand, Aset said. Good. Again, I gave a single nod. In the far future, when Epep leaves Set to possess Heru, then you must come find the location written here. I handed her a second piece of rolled-up papyrus. It will not make sense to you yet, but in time, there is also a second place and time on there. It is when and where we will first meet in my native timeline. Before then, you must gain a position as a healer at the establishment I wrote down, and you must be there on the night listed. Aset nodded. I understand. And Aset? I reached for her hand and took a deep breath. I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Her eyes widened the smallest amount. It was not Nguyen who rescued you from Nkure's father, was it? The tiniest smile curved her lips. It was not. I released her hand. Because it was me. Yes, dear friend. Her smile widened. It was you. And surprising me, she produced her own rolled sheet of papyrus, no bigger than a cigar. Directly before you return to your time, you must read this. My eyebrows rose. What is it? I asked as I started to break the gold seal. Aset placed her hand over the papyrus roll, stopping me. Not yet. You must read this only when you are about to leave. She flashed her trademark warm smile. Trust me. Only when I nodded did she pull her hand away. Okay. I turned to Nkure. Is Nguyen... I shook my head. Is Ra still out of commission? Because I really would have preferred to speak with him before I left, but I supposed it didn't make much difference whether I spoke to him before leaving this time or right after returning to my own.
So it seems, Nkure said. I can feel him, but he has yet to attempt to communicate with me.
He shook his head.
I do not know how long it will take. Apologies, Lex.
I touched his arm and offered him a smile. It is no fault of yours. What you did for him was very honorable. And a great sacrifice, I didn't say. Taking a step closer to him, I wrapped my arms around his trim torso in a tight hug, then did the same with Aset. I will miss you both. Not as much as we will miss you, I think. Aset squeezed me back. But we will meet again, this we know. After we finished our goodbyes, I watched Aset, Nkure, and the priestesses walk into the desert, following the path Heru and the rest of the Nezarets and their families had taken only a few hours earlier. Aset was speaking animatedly to Denai, giving her instructions on what her new secret Hathor cult must do to prepare for the events that would happen in thousands of years, leading to me coming here. Only once they were out of sight did I retreat into the tunnel that led through the limestone rubble covering the dome. I sealed off the entrance with a door of Ott that could only be triggered by the combination of both Heru's and my bonding pheromones, then made my way down the tunnel and headed toward Heru's palace to say goodbye to Tarset. The oasis, more like a cavern now, felt like an eerie, desolate husk, absent of the life it had teemed with only hours ago. But one day, in the distant future, I thought we might be able to resurrect Nguyen's glorious city. It would be a fitting tribute to the long life Ra had spent on Earth as Nguyen, the great father and creator of my people. I moved through the empty rooms of Heru's palace like a ghost, touching nothing, feeling empty. When I entered the children's room in the back of the palace, Tarset still looked like a sculpture of a sleeping child lying on her bed. Pulling a sleepy Russ out from his sling under my desert robes, I placed him on the bed beside the little girl. He stretched, yawned, and turned in a circle before curling up against her arm. I couldn't bring him with me. Traveling through time would, quite literally, tear him apart. But I could offer him his own form of time travel, just as I had done to give Tarset a fighting chance. See you soon, little guy, I said as I scratched the top of his head. He blinked lazily, then rested his chin on his front paws and closed his eyes. A moment later, he was as still and solid, as eternal as Tarset. I smiled, finding comfort in knowing that Heru's youngest daughter wouldn't be alone during the long millennia. Glancing around, I imagined how the room might look in 4,000 years, and all I could picture was inches and inches of dust and cobwebs, and I couldn't allow that, not on Tarset's and Russ's stone-like bodies. Leaning over the little girl, I pressed my lips to her forehead and whispered, "Sleep well, little fig." I cleared my throat roughly, tears welling in my eyes.
I'll see you soon, too. As I pulled away, I transformed the bed into solidified Ott, so it wouldn't collapse over the millennia, and spread a thin layer of Ott over it. No dust, no spider, or anything else would touch her or Russ while they lay there, frozen in time. After leaving Heru's palace, I sealed myself in my underground sanctuary, spending a few hours adding one final room that described the events that had taken place the previous afternoon, sealing off the door to the scandalous domed chamber — I would let Marcus read those words once I had returned — and creating a life-size statue of myself as one final gift to Marcus. When I was finished, I stopped by the altar in the burial chamber, as it truly was a burial chamber now, and spent a few minutes fussing with Nguyen's linen wrappings, making sure they were just so, before I formed a clear sheet of Ott over him as well. He was too wondrous to hide from the world, but too special to allow anyone to have free access to his body. And somehow, perhaps it was another of the strange snippets of information I was able to glean from the shoot, now that it was whole within me, I knew that his body would remain as it was for all eternity. Time would not, could not, touch one such as him. "I will see you again," I murmured, my hand pressed against the Ott just over his heart. And then, turning away, I pulled my desert robe over my head, leaving the linen in a heap in the corner of the room, knowing it would be long gone by the time Marcus found this place, and removed Aset's note from my small purse. I broke the seal and started to read the precise hieroglyphs. "I fear you will be angry with me when you read this, but it is what must be. That is all that matters. Know that because of what you are about to do, wherever you go, whenever you are, so long as Nakure and I are still alive, we will be there to help you along the way. Before you return to your time, you must go back even farther to rescue me and return me to my brother. And before you leave that time, you must give me this message to pass on to Nguyen, as he will be in another time while you are there. Great Father, my name is Alexandra Larson, the Meswet you seek. My mother is Alice, daughter of the Netjer-Ot Alexander and granddaughter of the Netjer-Ot Ivan. And my fathers are the Netjer-Ot Set and the Netjer-Apep. I am Hathor, your wife and bondmate to Heru. Find me, old friend, protect me, and Ma'at will be restored to the universe, for this is what has always been, and what will always be." I am not positive on the exact wording, but all of that must be said. Nguyen receiving this message is the moment that sets the course for the next 6,000 years, so make sure you do not err. Good luck, my dear friend. I shall see you again soon. I stared at Aset's words and shook my head slowly. She was wrong. I wasn't angry with her. I was stunned. Thinking about making my first purposeful jump through time was intimidating enough, but now I had to do it twice, and I didn't even know when or where I was supposed to go. My hands started to shake, making the papyrus rattle softly, and I knew myself well enough to know that if I didn't try right now, I would lose my nerve and never try at all. And then this room would become my tomb, as well as Nguyen's. Get it together, Lex. I rolled up the papyrus and returned it to my little drawstring purse. You can do this. I thought of Tarset and of Marcus and my mom and dad and Set and Jenny and her unborn baby and all of the other people in my time who were depending on me. And then I thought of Aset and what she was going through right now in some distant past, and as my resolve solidified, my hands stopped shaking. Holding my head high, I kept my focus locked on Aset, on saving her, and walked straight into the nearest wall, and out of time completely. I re-entered time stumbling and gasping. Before I even had a chance to orient myself to the sudden silvery light or the rushing, roaring sound all around me, I ran into a warm, hard, and oh so familiar smelling body crouching directly in front of me. Shit, I hissed as I tripped, skittered backward, and landed on my butt on soft, wet sand.
The back of my head connected with a small rock with a sickening crack, and stars filled my vision, joining the brilliant night sky that blazed overhead. Something cool and sharp was suddenly pressed against the front of my neck, and Heru's face appeared about a foot above mine. At least, I was pretty sure it was Heru. His spicy scent was exactly like Heru's, and his face resembled Heru's almost exactly, but not quite. He looked younger, softer, more human, I realized. And then it dawned on me. Because he was more human. He had to be, if I had really made it back to the time before Aset's attack and abduction. When Aset had been taken, she had yet to manifest, which meant the same was true for her twin, Heru.
"Who are you, and what are you doing here?"
He whispered in the original tongue, the low sound harsh. He shot a quick glance around.
"And where did you come from?"
I rubbed the back of my head and slowly sat up, pushing against his dagger blade with my neck. He let up just enough to allow me to sit fully, and took a position squatting in front of me. When I pulled my fingers away from my throbbing skull, they were sticky with warm blood. "Being assaulted by you, apparently," I muttered, only answering his second question, and even then only answering partially. Using a move he had taught me, I took hold of his wrist and twisted sharply, forcing him to drop the weapon and knowing full well that, were he any older or more experienced, it wouldn't have worked. "And you do not need that, Heru." I released his wrist. "I am here to rescue your sister." Heru moved away from me quickly, retrieving his dagger before standing. He eyed me warily. Sighing, I touched the back of my head again and swept my gaze over the moonlit landscape. Ocean waves beat against sand a short ways to my right, the water as dark as midnight, and to my left gentle slopes of pale sand spread out as far as I could see. The waves, at least, explained the rushing, roaring sound I had heard. As far as I could tell, we were somewhere on the northern African coast, where the Mediterranean Sea to one side and the Sahara to the other. Narrowing my eyes, I returned Heru's measuring stare. "What are you doing here?" At least the ache in the back of my skull was already receding. He straightened.
"Rescuing my sister."
I hadn't expected to find him there, despite it making sense that he would go after his sister. Recalling something Aset had told me when recounting her tale, I scanned Heru's body. Not that I could see much under the ankle-length black linen robe he was wearing. "You are injured. Where? Are you all right?" Heru's eyes widened and his free hand moved to touch the lower left side of his rib cage.
"I am fine. How did you—"
He shook his head.
"How do you know who I am? How do you know about my sister?"
I exhaled heavily and pushed up to my feet. Brushing off my backside, I met his eyes. "It is a long story, and one that we do not have time for now." I glanced out at the inky sea, then back at the endless desert. "Do you know where Aset has been taken?" He nodded, his eyes flicking to some point behind me. I shot a quick glance over my shoulder. A rocky outcropping jutted up toward the night sky several miles away.
"There is a cave. I believe he has her there."
I rubbed my hands together and stretched my neck from side to side, mentally preparing for whatever disturbing scene I might find inside this cave. "Is it just the two of them? Do you know? Or are there others?" Heru shook his head.
"I took care of the others back at the oasis, when he first took her."
"I see." Not willing to wait any longer, I said, "Wait here. I shall return with your sister shortly."
"What?"
Heru started toward me.
"But should I not—"
Before he could finish, the misty swirling colors of the Ott surrounded me, and I jumped from the peaceful moonlit beach to a cavern that could have been inhabited by the devil himself. A single campfire lit pale, jagged walls with writhing streaks of orange and yellow, making the stone appear almost on fire itself. A sharp shriek cut through the crackle of burning wood, closely followed by a low, menacing laugh. On the cavern floor, on the other side of the fire, a small, nude woman huddled, curled in on herself, and a larger masculine figure loomed over her, his back to me. "Please," Aset gasped. "No more." She hugged her knees to her bare chest in what was clearly a desperate attempt to protect herself. Rage boiled in my blood, and my hands curled into fists. "Your depths of depravity never cease to amaze me," I said through gritted teeth. Aset's captor spun around, pulling an obsidian dagger from his woven leather belt and licking his lips. Hunger gleamed in his dark eyes. "Who are you?" he hissed, taking a step toward me. I sneered. Even possessing a Nezarette, he stood about as much chance against me, against Ra's shoot, as an ant. "You are pathetic, Epep." He stumbled, then stopped, his mouth hanging open and his eyes shining with outrage. Laughing, I raised my hand, and just as I had done to Ankesempepi, I called forth vines of Ot. They burst up from the cavern floor and snaked around Epep's legs, restraining him. "You disgust me. If I could erase you from existence. But I couldn't. And as awful as it was to admit, even if I could, I wouldn't." His lips retracted and he snarled. I ignored his little outburst. "But you are needed in the future." I crossed my arms over my chest. "So all I can do is take young Aset away from you and erase all of your memories of her and what you have done to her, and all memory of me, of course." I scanned him from head to toe, recalling something else Aset had included in her tale. "And your host body's memories as well, since he invited you to possess him in the first place." I smiled, feeling the spirit of vengeance fill me, keeping me calm, helping me focus. "And I think I shall leave you trapped in that body for a little while longer." I willed the odd vines to climb higher, capturing his arms and trapping them against his body before stepping closer. Raising my hand, I touched my fingertips to Epep's forehead, preparing to erase both Epep and his host's memories. "It is a fitting punishment that your freedom will mean his death, but it is not enough. I think I shall add some memories of intense pain as well. Though I fear that, too, will not be enough. Nothing will change what must come." Epep started to writhe in his odd bindings as I did as I had promised, and even through the chill that had slowly been seeping into my soul, I found pleasure in his tormented grunts and cries, which probably should have bothered me. But in the thrall of the chill, the oneness, it didn't. "Please do not hurt me," Aset whimpered, her voice small and shrill. I shifted my focus to her, and the oneness shattered. Moving toward her slowly, I held out my hands and spoke to her, keeping my voice low, my tone calm. "I will not hurt you, Aset." I crouched in front of her, but made no move to touch her. "Your brother is waiting for you outside, just a short ways up the beach. I will take you to him. Heru? You saw Heru?" She raised her head, meeting my eyes for the first time. Her own widened. "Oh my, your eyes are like the Great Father's." I offered her a small smile and nodded. "Yes, they are. And I came here to rescue you because he was away and could not do it himself." I glanced over my shoulder at the shuddering form of Epep's host body. "He will not bother you again, I swear it." Her eyes lingered on the forbidding man, still held upright by the odd vines restraining him, then settled back on me. She blinked several times, tears welling in her eyes and her chin trembling, and when I reached out a hand to give her shoulder a gentle squeeze, she threw herself at me. Shuddering and sobbing, she clung to me like I was the only thing keeping her alive. I held her tightly and rubbed her back in slow circles. She was so small, so fragile, it seemed, and it amazed me to think of the strong, graceful woman she would become. Eventually she quieted, and I helped her to her feet. "Do you have any clothing?" She shook her head, her eyes flicking to the fire. "He burned my dress." I sighed, my own eyes landing on a rough woven blanket. Retrieving it quickly, I wrapped it around her shoulders along with my arm and guided her toward the narrow, uneven mouth of the cave. Neither of us glanced back at her abductor. "How did you know to come?" she asked once we were out of the stifling cave and under the stars. I laughed softly. Now that is quite the story. "I think I would very much like to hear a story right now," Aset said softly. "I would like to think about anything else but what he did to me." I squeezed her shoulders, my heart bleeding for her. "Very well. In about 1,000 years... "Must you go?" Aset asked as we neared the place where I had left her brother. The sand was soft and cool under our bare feet, and she had seemed both awed and soothed by my fantastical tale of what was to come. I nodded. I must. I could just make out the outline of Heru, maybe a half-mile away, though I knew he wouldn't be able to see us yet, and I wanted to leave before I had a chance to complicate our relationship any further than it already was. Stopping, I turned to face Aset and captured both of her hands. "You cannot tell Heru or any others what I have told you." I gave her hands a squeeze. "You must promise me." She blinked in surprise, but nodded. Frowning, she said, "What about the Great Father? Surely he must already know of you and what is to come." I bit my lip, my eyebrows drawing together. "I do not think so." Taking a deep breath, I pulled the piece of papyrus Aset had given me a millennium in the future out of my satchel and unrolled it. "You must tell him this and only this," I said, and then I relayed her own future words to her, paraphrasing only a little. "My name is Alexandra Larson, and I am the Meswet you seek. My mother is Alice, daughter of the Netcher-Ot Alexander, and granddaughter of the Netcher-Ot Ivan, and my fathers are the Netcher-Ot Set and the Netcher-Apep. I am Hathor, your wife." I watched Aset's eyes widen. "And bondmate to Heru." Her mouth fell open. I smiled just a little. "Bind me, old friend, protect me, and Ma'at will be restored. For this is what has always been, and will always be." I paused, studying her pretty, stunned face. "Do you need me to repeat it?" She quirked her mouth to the side, clearly unsure. "You will not be able to find this moment in the Ot to rehear it, even after you've manifested, so..." Abruptly she nodded. "Then yes, repeat it once more, and I shall remember." I did as she requested, then once again took hold of her hands. "There is one more thing you must know. You will be with child from what that Netcher-Ot did to you." She didn't look surprised, much to my surprise. "That was what he wanted." "Ah," I understood. "You must tell Nguyen that I said that the child is not to be harmed, that he must be allowed to live, though under the guise of being Heru's firstborn rather than yours. Can you do that?" Wide-eyed, she nodded. "Good." I gave her hands a squeeze before releasing them. "In many years, there will be a pharaoh named Pepi Neferkare. On the day of his funeral procession, I will jump through time to arrive at a temple run by priestesses of the cult of Hathor in Mennefer." "Hathor?" Aset stared at me quizzically and shook her head. "This is you, correct?" I nodded, if a bit hesitantly, though I wasn't sure why. After all, I had just told her to tell Nguyen that I was Hathor. "But I prefer Lex." "There is no temple cult devoted to you yet." I shivered, feeling like someone had just walked over my grave. "Then you must ensure that one exists by the time I arrive." Aset nodded slowly. "Yes, I believe I can do this." "And remember, when I arrive, I will not know you. Not really." "Because all you have told me has not yet happened. For that younger version of you," Aset said, accepting it all a whole lot better and more quickly than I had. "Aset," Heru called. Peering over Aset's shoulder, I could see Heru running along the beach toward us. I met Aset's eyes. I must go before he sees enough of me that I must erase his memory. "Very well." Unexpectedly, Aset leaned in and wrapped her arms around me. "Thank you. Thank you so much." Her body shook as she spoke.
You cannot know how much I appreciate what you have done. My life is yours. But do not forget, Aset, I whispered. It is also yours. Pulling back, I smiled down at her. Aset. Heru was only several dozen paces away. Farewell, I said, right before hurtling myself into the yacht, body, ba, and all, thinking only of the oasis and of my own time. Dizzily, I staggered out of the yacht and into Nguyen's crystalline sarcophagus. He looked just as I had left him what felt like a short time ago, his features glowing in a soft incandescence, in a semblance of peace, of sleep. For a moment, as I stared at his familiar, unusually relaxed features, I thought it hadn't worked, and I had returned to the oasis at the end of the 6th dynasty, instead of my own native time. Welcome home, Lex. I spun around, making my time travel vertigo even worse. A trim man dressed in all black, with black hair, multiple facial piercings, and an amalgam of tattoos in various shades of gray covering his exposed arms, stood in the doorway to the right of Nguyen's altar. Nekure, I breathed, right before my knees gave way, and I lost consciousness. Okay, that is it for this episode of Read by the Author. I will be back next week to continue with chapter 45. Until then, happy reading!